Hey everybody, I'm Kevin Lobo and I'm the Vice President of Consulting here at Analytics 8. We're excited to have you here today for a discussion about data analytics priorities for 2025. Right before the new year, we published a complete guide for data leaders and companies to use as they prioritize their initiatives in 2025. So we're inundated with a lot of hype in the data analytics industry. Our guide helps to avoid all of that hype and provides practical advice that can be applied to make a real difference with data. So I'm really excited. Today, I have 5 contributors to our guide, and we're going to go deeper on some of the concepts that they believe will help organizations get ahead this year. So today, we're going to go cover the topics of open data lake formats, explainable AI, statistical process control, data mesh, and platform native AI insights. This is by no means an exhaustive list. Some of these concepts may or may not be applicable to you, but these are the priorities that we're most excited about. I encourage you to connect with our panelists on LinkedIn, where they can answer any further questions that you may have as we're going to cover today. If you do have any questions for the panel as we go along, I encourage you to drop them in the chat. We'll be monitoring it as we're going through the content today. Our marketing team is also going to be dropping resources in the chat for you. So please keep the chat open. Just keep an eye out if you want to learn more. So the first topic that I want to dive into for today is on open data lake formats with Brian Buxton. So for those unfamiliar, we're going to be talking about the rise of data formats such as Delta Lake, Iceberg, and Parquet, and how those really influence the decoupling of storage from compute. So Brian, first question for you. Can you give us a little background on what open data lake formats are from your viewpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. So at their core, open data lake formats are files or a series of files. You'll often see them hosted on cloud platforms. So your S3 buckets, your Azure Data Lake storage, your Google Cloud storage. And the big players right there you mentioned are Delta, there's Iceberg, there's Hootie, and you have Parquet, which are really just the basic file format that kind of underpins a lot of those formats as well. So I'm not going to go into the details of the inner structure of how these things actually work, right? I think that could be a 2 hour long session.
Yeah.
But I think the keys that I want to point out on those file formats is really they're really trying to act as tables, right? So just you want to be able to use them just like you would a table in a data warehouse, right? That's really the goal. So a lot of those best practices are kind of built into those individual files, which is pretty neat, honestly, right? Like it's all compartmentalized in that file. So, basically the key there is they're really optimized for large data sets. So when you start talking gigabytes and larger, but they don't have to be, right? They still have all those best practices. They may not be as fast as for smaller data as you would expect versus big data. So that's definitely, kind of the way they were built and what they're designed for, but they've really expanded that use case to be broader for even small data sets. So things like ACID guarantees, right? Those are things that you look for in your transactional systems. They all, have some form of that. And obviously they all have different things that are better or worse for these different formats, but they're all pretty similar in that regard. They can be updated, deleted, inserted into like a traditional file format. So something like Parquet, you have to write it out every time. These Delta formats have the ability to insert data just like you would a traditional table in a data warehouse. And beyond that, right, they act as tables, but they also have a lot of, really nifty, nice features. So things like time travel. So you have that history of things that have been operated on in those tables. So you can see, on this date, what was the state of that file or that table. So that's really powerful. They have tons of optimization. So you can horizontally scale them out. You can partition them. There's things like schema evolution where the schema, you can set it to change and evolve over time. So if you have data that changes a lot, it's not going to just outright fail. Obviously, that's something you want to weigh the options there. And they also are often built for streaming. So, you might just have batch loads that are going in, but it can also be optimized for streaming. Obviously, you're going to pay the compute for that, but these files can usually handle that in some capacity. And kind of rounding it all out, the best part about all these files is they're open. So
Yeah.
they often have a large organization that's supporting them, but they have, an open source license. So you have, 90% of the good features of those formats. They might not be the most up-to-date features and functionality as you would on a larger platform, enterprise platform, but they are open. You can run them on your local machine. You can run them in the cloud. You can run them pretty much anywhere. So that's really awesome. And I think the last thing is, right, they're really built to be used with the catalog, and we can probably get into that later. But they're really pretty impressive, and I think people should start looking at them, honestly.
So obviously you identified it as priority for 2025, but why do you think it's going to be important for organizations this year?
Yeah. So like I said, these formats are originally built for these large big data platforms, right? And I think, I mentioned that it doesn't have to be for that reason. And I think the reason that in 2025 and even at the end of 2024, they became more and more apparent and being used across pretty much any workload is that, a lot of query engines have adopted them. So you can pretty much run them in any system, any compute engine you want. So if it's Databricks or Snowflake, they obviously have great support for these files, but even just, you can run a Python notebook and create these files on your local machine, right? There's very low barrier to entry. So that openness really helps. And I think we'll continue to see that expanded support across engines. And I think one thing to definitely look for is that the ability to write out to those file formats, to be able to do those insert and update operations. You should be able to eventually do those on any platform you want. And that might be one thing that might not be supported yet. So you definitely want to pay attention to that and how easy that will be. But yeah, really that flexibility that it continues to grow, and also just the functionality and the support and the production support for these files is going to continue to go up, and it's really kind of hit the cusp of hey, everyone should take a look at these, especially with some of the open catalog abilities. So those catalogs are super helpful in managing these file formats, right? Before they're just a file path out there in your S3 bucket. Now they really interact and look like the series of schemas and catalogs like you would in a traditional data warehouse.
So where do you see the most impact or opportunity for organizations? Is it on accessibility? Is it on speed? Is it return on investment, cost? Where do you kind of see the lanes?
Yeah, so I think, as mentioned, the flexibility is probably the big one, right? If you have a bunch of different teams that all have different priorities, it's great because you can say, okay, we're going to land our files in this format or series of formats, and anyone could go use them. Obviously, there's governance around that, so you're going to want to use these open catalogs and make sure that you can grant access to them properly, which those open catalogs can help with that. Or if you go with a platform like Databricks, they have that kind of all built in. Obviously, if you have big data, right, you're scaling out and your traditional data warehouse doesn't support these large queries, really great time to start looking at them, but it doesn't have to be. We just had an implementation, in this case it was Databricks, but using Delta format. And I think the worry was that it'd be tough for them to pick up. There's a lot of barriers and getting the team up to speed using these new formats, and cost, right? They're worried about, hey, this is a serverless platform, how's it going to look when we start running things at scale? And I think they're really impressed with the fact that they could get it up and running. And we use those kind of traditional data warehousing best practices in the data workflows, and the cost kind of surprised them that it was as low as it was, right? So they were really happy with that, and I think it kind of goes to show you don't need massive data, you don't need a very specific use case or horizontally scaling to have success there. You can get those best practices and those up-to-date features and modern features pretty easily with low barrier to entry. So yeah, they're pretty impressive, and they've come a long way in the last few years.
Awesome. So to kind of recap, feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong on anything here. We see the impact of open data lake formats really being felt for organizations on return on investment and cost perspective, from an accessibility standpoint, in that it not only really decouples storage from compute, but it also kind of decouples from vendors themselves. And then from an overall speed and efficiency standpoint, is that kind of a good encapsulation?
Yeah, and especially into 2025 and beyond, these open catalogs, right? You don't have to have your catalog in some sort of system, AWS Glue or Databricks or Snowflake. Like you can run your own catalog and have kind of the best practices with the grants. And I think those are kind of getting to parity with the enterprise platforms. But yeah, with that last piece, you really have kind of something that you can just run on your own, not paying licensing or having to be locked into a platform, right? You have a lot of flexibility there. So it's really impressive.
Okay. If you're curious on learning more, check out the resources in the chat. I definitely encourage you to also connect with Brian Buxton on LinkedIn. He can answer any further questions that you may have on the topic. So to kind of move along things, I wanted to jump to our next topic for the day. It's a concept that has a lot of evangelists in data engineering circles. We're going to be talking about data mesh. So this isn't necessarily a novel concept, but Abu and I are going to spend a few minutes talking about data mesh and why he views it as a data priority in 2025. So Abu, to kind of jump in, can you give us an overview on data mesh and why you see it as a priority this year?
Yes, of course. I think data mesh is a recent response to the challenges that large or complex organizations have been facing to deliver values fast in a reliable way and at a scale, right? I should also mention that the concept of data mesh is not new. It has existed in software engineering, and Jean-Marc Deqani brought that concept and applied it to data. It helps organizations to move from for having a gigantic data architecture system owned by one central team. And normally, most of the time, these centralized team, they don't have that much of business context, right? So the concept of data mesh is like moving from these gigantic systems to a more of a decentralized and manageable architectures. Data set, here's data mesh has a set of principles basically, and these principles are tools and technologies agnostics, meaning that data mesh by itself is a concept, is an approach, but it is not a tool or technology at all, right? And these principles are, I'm going to name them, but I don't think we would have time to go into the details. Domain ownership, which means decentralizations here in this concept, data as a product, and self-serve and federated data governance. I'll send a link for everyone to read more about data mesh and what it is. But in a nutshell, this is an overview of a data mesh.
Appreciate that. Now, everybody here on this panel is a practitioner. We've definitely worked both within centralized and decentralized teams, varying structures. So I'm actually very curious on what you see based off of your own personal experience as the challenges or difficulties in implementing data mesh at scale within an organization.
I have helped many clients to implement data mesh. I think to apply data mesh properly, it requires a significant change in your organizations. It requires almost a cultural shift at your organizations, the way the different teams are interacting with each other, the way stakeholders are talking or interacting with each other. So I think it impacts that kind of interactions at the org level. I would say the most challenging part is that you need to have a buy-in from a leadership team, data engineers, analytics engineers, product team, et cetera, almost everyone who is part of like this cultural shift at the organizational level. And if you rely solely on technology, you will fail. So I think people, processes are really important to take care of.
Got it. Definitely makes sense. What do you see as the benefits or opportunities to gain for organizations in adopting data mesh across their teams?
Good questions. Again, I think if we can apply data mesh properly, it can bring orders, right? And that is really important. You need order to be able to scale better, right? And the other thing is like you can bring trust to the data, and like people can trust the data. And then once you have like order, and also you can scale better at the large organizations, and like you trust your data, you can accelerate. So it can accelerate a speed to value for you to get to the insights and informations. And I think the last piece of it is that it brings data and business domains closer together, which is really, really important, right? It's like historically, if you're working in a centralized team or system, it's like the data team, they know about the data very well, but they might lack business context. But when we talk about data mesh, as an approach here is like the business owners or the business domain owners work closely with data. And this kind of like close the gap between these two, between data and business.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely helps in facilitating adoption when you have domain owners closer to the process, closer to the data. I think
100%.
We just talked about open data lake formats, and Brian was kind of talking about the adoption in the marketplace that he's seen, and I know that you're talking about data mesh, how you've applied that at scale for organizations. So kind of question for both of you, how do open data lake formats help facilitate the adoption of data mesh? How are those two concepts kind of interconnected from your viewpoint?
Yeah, I can jump in on this. So yeah, I think ultimately when we talk about open data formats, right, you can kind of land that data anywhere. And so you have that flexibility that I mentioned. And I think coupled with the catalog features, right? So those two things, being able to scale that out, right? And having kind of a centralized source and system to run those operations. So, in a traditional world, if you're trying to run data mesh, you may have an organization, one part of your organization that's running in, one type of data warehouse, another that's using, another third party, and try to integrate those things. We all know how much hard it is to integrate across different systems. So if you have it all in a centralized, data lake house, whatever you want to call it, on these formats, it's pretty easy to share them. And so if someone's using this, compute engine X versus compute engine Y, as long as they can support running those Delta Lake formats, there's really less barrier, right, of getting that done, right? You can really just, grant the access to that team for this subset of data, and it can all live in kind of one place. And I think as an IT organization, right, they hate managing all these different systems. So having it kind of centralized on the technology side kind of opens up and unlocks a lot of opportunity that would be, large, long, slow processes to get all the security and everything set up properly to manage that kind of broad different teams trying to, cross data boundaries. And I guess the last thing, right, is those Unity catalogs all have things like lineage. You can put a lot of documentation and metadata in there, which kind of supports the ability to, collaborate and also just have a very strong understanding between business and technology in those data teams.
I think Brian nailed it. And I think I would say anything that can help to have a better data governance system in place, it would be very helpful when we talk about data mesh as an approach.
So I appreciate the conversation here, guys. I think one of the main takeaways for me on data mesh as a concept, and Abu, feel free to correct me as well. It's a concept that allows for a decentralized approach. It helps to empower domain experts across the organization, and in turn can facilitate adoption of data products. But I think, at least personally from my viewpoint, without proper data governance protocols in place, you may actually end up worse off than where you started if you're implementing data mesh. So I think that's an important thought. Do you agree or disagree with me on that one?
I 100% agree with that. Yes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the conversation. I'm just going to take a quick peek at the chat real quick. One question that just came in while we were talking. So these are $0 licensing costs, correct? I think this is probably specific to you, Brian, the open data lake formats.
Yep. So the open data lake formats obviously are free to set up. Even those open catalogs I mentioned in the chat, things like Unity Catalog and Polaris, they have an open source version. It's not going to be as pretty and as streamlined as the kind of paid for platforms, but yeah, they should be, zero licensing fees on those, but you have to host them by yourself and manage all the infrastructure for them, which is pretty lightweight, but it may not be for everyone. And a lot of those catalogs are pretty low cost to just run on the different platforms. You don't have to use the compute with them. So you do have options there, but obviously it's going to be a little bit trickier if they're going to want you to use their system for that. But certainly, ways to do that without having to host your own as well.
All right, well, I appreciate the conversation, guys. We're going to turn to our next topic. The next priority that I want to talk about for today is one that's actually been around for quite some time. It's called statistical process control. There's nobody more passionate about this concept at Analytics 8 than Sean Costello. So he's joining me here today to dive into the conversation. So Sean, can you give an overview on what statistical process control is?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, you mentioned it's been around for a while. Fun fact, the first form of the process behavior chart turned 100 in 2024. But yeah, when you hear statistical process control, like at first it sounds kind of daunting, right? Like, you need to be a data scientist, you need all this like industrial measurement equipment, but that's not the case at all. It was meant to be simple, for people on the ground on a manufacturing floor, just based on like rules of thumb that were just refined over decades and decades of experience. And while it is traditionally associated with manufacturing, it's been proven to work in many sectors, right? So it's been used to improve patient outcomes, measure the effectiveness of education reform on students. Even there's this example of a small nightclub in Japan using it to identify why they weren't making money on beer and sake sales. So it can be pretty broadly applied. But the ultimate goal of statistical process control is to develop what we call like a causal model of your business. So it's this conceptual framework that represents like all the factors and relationships that drive the performance and outcomes of your business. So over time, we're going to develop that causal model. You're not going to do it right away, but you're going to look for routine and exceptional variation and investigate causes of that exceptional variation. Start to understand how changes in your controllable input factors then impact your intermediate factors, which then change your business outcomes. And then just conducting experiments through plan to study X cycles. So it's a lot, but all of that is kind of covered under the umbrella of statistical process control.
I appreciate the background and the overview. So obviously you and I have talked offline a lot about this. And for those of you who are on the call, I spent a significant amount of time developing a lot of internal and external reporting while I was a practitioner out there in the field. So curious for your viewpoint, kind of two-parter. How does leveraging something like statistical process control differ from traditional reporting and analytics? And why do you think organizations should have an eye towards leveraging it versus building a traditional report in something like Tableau or Power BI?
Yeah, good question. It's a two-parter, but I'm going to try to merge it into one answer. So there's a couple of problems with traditional analytics that statistical process control is going to help with. The first is, real world data, it's messy and it wiggles a lot. And that's just because there's variation in everything all the time. Sometimes we see these infographics that are these really clean, polished things, and they have, clear trends and patterns. And we think, we set up a dashboard, that's what ours is going to look like. And that's rarely the case, right? So, we may have a chart and it's going to have so much wiggle, and, maybe in the near term, it looks like it's trending negatively. So we make a change to our process or operations, and we wait a few weeks and it looks like it's trending up, but then a few more weeks, then it's down, and then the whole thing looks kind of flat. So it's like, how do you know whether your change had any meaningful impact, right? So SVC has something called an XMAR chart or a control chart, which clearly separates like the signal from the noise. Then another problem with traditional analytics is that they don't typically convey the relationship between the controllable input metrics and then the intermediate factors, and then the outputs that you're ultimately trying to move, or the things you're trying to achieve, right? So you could be pulling all the levers that you can, but the chart that you're measured by, whatever, is an intermediate factor that is influenced by a bunch of other controllable input metrics, and you're pulling all your levers, but something else in the business or somewhere else is offsetting all the gains that you're doing. So then it appears flat. So we can leverage what we call a KPI or metric tree that shows this relationship between the numbers, and then so that different levels of the org chart can really focus on the specific metrics that are in their influence sphere of control. Unfortunately, though, most BI tools like Tableau and Power BI don't have XMR charts and KPI trees as like out of the box chart types. There's ways you can get the charts in there, but out of the box they're not going to be there. So you're going to have to augment your existing BI tooling if you're going to want to embrace statistical process control. But I'm a nerd. I firmly believe that the advantages are going to be worth it.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed a point that makes it very relevant and salient to me. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it's effectively the exceptional versus routine variation, like what's good and what's not good. And having like a benchmark to actually gauge it off of. That's what kind of makes it a very powerful concept to me. Now, final question for you. We're talking about a concept that's been around for 100 years, as you were kind of alluding to at the beginning. So how do you see this concept making an impact this year in 2025 for organizations?
Well, I mean, I would hope that it's the year that the major BI vendors get their act together and include these chart types, but that's probably unlikely. So I think, it's just as relevant today as it was decades ago. It's a methodology on how to make sense of your data and know what specific actions to take. And, there's easy way to make an impact if you're an individual process operator or you're a manager. Like there's really low barriers to entry, right? So you can start applying it today, and there's free open source tools that you can use. So if you can export to Excel, and you probably are already doing that, then you can use these tools and get started with XMR charts. And then, hey, if you start seeing some wins, then like evangelize and, spread it to other areas of the org. And, do kind of more of the grassroots bottom up style. But now if you're a business leader, an executive, and you want to make this org wide, that's going to be a little bit bigger lift because it's going to require a culture shift, and it's really going to have to change how you set your goals and how you measure performance. So it's going to require like a lot of buy-in from everyone and a lot of operational rigor. But if you do embrace it org-wide, it can be pretty huge. All these tiny, small improvements add up to big wins. And that's actually Amazon implemented these concepts in their weekly business review. And that's how they grew to be the behemoth that they are today. But at the end of the day, statistical process control is how you turn your data into knowledge.
Yeah, and I mean, for what it's worth, internal to analytics, this is a concept that I've applied not to a huge extent, but I've definitely started applying it in my own weekly portfolio reviews with my team. So definitely see the value in it. So I appreciate the context and conversation. Obviously, if you can't tell, Sean is really passionate about this concept. So definitely reach out to him directly on LinkedIn. Check out some of the resources that we've dropped in the chat. Again, this isn't a novel concept. It's been around for a while, but it's one with staying power. It enables organizations to cut through the noise, really assess what's routine versus exceptional variation, understand the core drivers within their KPIs. So it's a great lens in which to analyze data versus what's traditionally found in standard dashboards and reporting. Before we move on, I just want to take a quick peek on the chat. We got a couple of questions here. Abu, we had one going back to data mesh that we missed before we transitioned. If there are budgetary restrictions, what are the most optimal IT roles to manage a data mesh framework?
I think you're going to have budgetary restrictions regardless, right? And I think it's important to talk to the business owners and have buy-in early during the phase. I would say this is again an approach you can take, but I think the most proper persons you can talk would be I don't know, like your managers, like the CEO should be aware of this, the CFO should be aware of if there's any budget restrictions here. That's my answer.
Appreciate it. And then we have a couple of questions related to SPC. So Sean, there's one in there. Aside from canned reporting tools, do you find yourself using Python to customize SPC? And if so, to what extent?
Yeah, so right now I just use this open source tool called, it's spelled out like XMRit, but it's pronounced Xamarin. And it's just an easy way to just take some data, throw it in a chart, play around. You can lock your limits. You can add dividers to separate periods of time. And it's just a really quick and easy tool to use if you want to start with XMR charts. The KPI trees, to be honest, I haven't found a great solution on that, but still exploring. And all right, there's a lot of questions coming in, so
you got a lot of statistical process control
yeah,
questions.
I'll start answering them in the comments, and if I can't get to all of them, then yeah, you can just connect with me directly on LinkedIn.
Okay, I'm gonna defer to you to answer these in the chat.
Yep,
we still have two more panelists to get through. I love the interaction, by the way. This is great to see. So keep those questions coming. Okay. So we're going to move on to our next priority and concept for the day. Our next speaker that is going to help me in this has no issues in explaining things, so it's only appropriate that he's going to spend a few minutes talking about his top data priority for 2025, which is explainable AI. So Josh Johnston, what is explainable AI and how is it different than generative AI?
So, first off, thank you, Kevin, for that introduction. And it's a great question to kick off the topic, right? Because the root of many AI projects today starts with generative AI, right? So generative AI is a concept of creating new things and new content, whether that be images or music or text. So if that's generative AI, then what's explainable AI? So, when we think about explainable AI, that focuses on the transparency of how AI models derive to decisions and conclusions. This is especially important when we think about, highly complex models like deep learning models.
Yep.
So, as generative AI has the goal of content creation, explainable AI has the goal of clarity, transparency, and really puts the context of why and how behind, AI's actions and predictions.
Got it. So how are we going to see this concept move the needle for organizations in 2025?
So I love this question because it's really us discussing the value that explainable AI brings and who exactly should be thinking about this concept and overlaying into their AI-based projects today. So because explainable AI is all about transparency in highly complex models, the most relevant use cases we immediately think about are those where the reasoning behind the decision is hypercritical, given either sensitivity or legality or financial weight behind the choice that's being made, right? So think about use cases where AI is helping with a diagnosis within healthcare or a loan approval in the finance world or even in the legal space, right? The decisions behind these examples are critical for different reasons, and we know there are large companies today that are already incorporating AI into these use cases I just mentioned. So to your point, how does explainable AI move the needle here? Well, when we think about that, there's a few things for organizations. On the one hand, there's just creating a deeper trust in AI systems, leading to greater adoption and more successful outcomes. Another thing is just it produces more, I'll say, accountability, as complex AI models will be more heavily monitored and produce more reasonable, ethical predictions in highly regulated sectors like finance and healthcare and the legal system. And it also improves their overall optimization of your AI models. Often, in the, to Sean's point, us nerds in the tech world, when we see AI make a mistake, it's hard to pinpoint where in the model it failed exactly. But by incorporating explainable AI principles to the model, we can better see the, I'll say, like, decision tree of a model and what that model went through to reach its conclusions, which enables us to fine-tune a model more effectively. And that's really just kind of a short list, right? There's really a further plethora of things that explainable AI can do for you. But what's easy for me to say right now is that it'll be a game changer for certain sectors in the market that have already been investing in the AI space heavily.
Got it. So, I mean, as well as I do that over the course of 2024, we saw kind of mixed adoption in generative AI solutions over the course of the year. Some organizations really took to it. Some organizations, the common point or thread of feedback was, I want to do something with this, but I don't really know what that is. So how do you feel that explainable AI is going to be different in that regard?
You are so right, Kevin. It's AI as it continues to grow and grow in complexity and the things they could do for all organizations. Everyone's trying to figure it out, right? So it's really going to depend for companies that are still trying to figure out what a successful AI project looks like. They'll probably still stay in that mindset and continue down a more, I'll call it a more like generative AI like project until they pin it down. And that's because generative AI is easy to understand and the value is extremely tangible, whether it's, like a chat bot, like what we're all seeing on the plethora of, favorite websites that we're all on, or other operational efficiencies that generative AI provides. So it's very clear that AI can and will enhance all business if built well and built intentionally towards a clear idea or need. Now, on the flip side, for the organizations that are already incorporating and succeeding with generative AI or other types of deep learning models that are more geared towards analysis and classifications, explainable AI is most likely the forefront of their mind because they're soon running into same challenges that we all are running into right now, which is trust in AI, adoption of AI, transparency, and even like I was mentioning before with regulatory compliances. So that's where I see explainable AI differing going forward in organizations.
Got it. So to close this topic out, what I'm kind of hearing is the core differentiator with explainable AI is the context that it's able to provide users. It isn't really a platform that just returns data or answers to your question, but it provides the underlying context of why a decision should be made or why the conclusion was drawn. From my own viewpoint, from what I've seen in the market, I see a lot of traction being made here. Sometimes you might see this referred to as a agentic AI. There's a platform in particular called Zenolytic. It's one vendor that we're excited about that's helped to facilitate this use case particularly well. Do appreciate the time, Josh. If you're interested in learning more on this topic, check out the chat and definitely connect with Josh on LinkedIn. I'm just going to do a quick check on the chat and see what we have here. Looks like we got all of our responses back. Okay. Here, I think we're good here. Okay. So we're gonna turn to our final topic of the day. We're gonna keep on the topic of AI. And the final priority that we want to cover is platform native AI insights. This pertains more to the AI capabilities within data platforms themselves, as opposed to AI deployed as a general concept. So Michael Coleman's gonna help me facilitate this conversation. So Michael, in your own words, could you give me a little background and how you define platform native AI and what it is?
Yeah, what we're talking about here is AI that's like directly embedded in your data platform itself, right? So, it sounds simple on the surface. Maybe you're thinking of like an AI assistant that you can talk to, something like a chat GPT, just like a little chatbot that you can use to talk to, whether you're, engineering or asking questions or anything like that. But the real important thing here, I think, with this embedded AI that's in the data platforms is that if you set your data up the right way, there's really like a low barrier to entry, right? Like if you, from the beginning, if you just set your data up correctly, it's there for you to use and it has the full context of your data in the background. Now, like traditionally, to give AI your data, you'd have to like connect them, right? And actually build pipelines and to give it like the true context of your organization. But what we're seeing now with these embedded AIs in the platform, if you just set it up, you don't have to go through that process of giving the AI agent or assistant or the model your data itself. It's already built into the system.
Yeah, so you're really taking advantage of the foundational work that you're doing within the data platform itself, and then basically facilitating the AI usage with the capabilities that are already built in. So I guess, why do you view this as a priority for organizations in 2025?
Yeah, well, we're still in the middle of the AI arms race, as people like to say, and I think it's especially important for all of these data platforms now to stand out, because we still see at the end of the day, businesses are asking, right? Like, what can AI do for me? How can I integrate it? What can I do with it? AI is great. I don't want to just talk to it, right? At the end of the day, I need to have tangible results of what is this AI going to do for me? And I think data platforms are starting to use that as a major selling point, right? Like we have all these capabilities. You don't have to really pay anything extra. It's all baked in and it's right there for you to use whether you want it or not. And I think what's a differentiator here is going back to our earlier conversation, talking with Brian about the open data platforms, right? Compute engines are becoming really plug and play at the end of the day. If you set up the open data lake and you're using different compute engines, right, you can pick and choose your favorite one, depending on like what your needs are and what AI products and services they offer. And we're starting to see like these platforms really put a ton of money into it, right? Like, for instance, recently Databricks obviously had the $10 billion funding and they secured another $5 billion in debt financing, right? Like we know where all this money is going. It's the buzz right now. It's into AI and what can it do for me? And I think what they're trying to do is really create a super low barrier of entry to using AI, giving it full context of your organization if you go with this vendor, right? So some simple examples right now are just, in Snowflake, they have Copilot running that you can use. In Databricks, they have their AI assistant with a bunch of different tools that you can use. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more here. But, the priority to me is basically what platform do you want to choose? Who offers the best? So you need to be super aware of what's going on in this space.
Love it. I really appreciate that context there. So I guess, where do you see opportunities for organizations to leverage platform native AI insights this year?
Yeah, I mean, the first and easiest, in my opinion, is all this ad hoc reporting that every organization does to some extent, right? I think what we're seeing is these data platforms are really shifting, away from just being a data platform for engineers to use to create their backend data. What they're
Yeah.
trying to do is get business users to start using these platforms, right? They want business users to go into Snowflake and Databricks and all these other platforms and not have to know how to write SQL to figure out some answers, right?
Mhm.
And they want to lower that friction between the business of, oh, hey, I need this information right now. It's not in this report. Can you come get it to me for this meeting? Like all that ad hoc stuff that happens.
Yeah.
I think they're trying to really get rid of that by having these AI like assistants and chats fully understand the organization and the data behind it. So you can just ask the AI, whatever questions you have and get your answers immediately. Another thing that, we're starting to see here is I think this is really cool. It's the dashboarding aspect, right? Like Databricks has their AI BI Genie right now. And I think we'll start seeing it being used a lot more in 2025, but what it essentially is text to dashboard AI, right? So you can ask for specific dashboards. You know, every company has some sort of, Power BI, Tableau, some sort of reporting system on their end. And I don't think this is going to completely uproot that right now, but let's say you need this type of chart for this, it's in your mind, this is what you want. You could maybe go try and do an Excel on your own, or you can ask somebody on the BI team to create this for you, right? But all of those have a little bit higher friction for you to do.
Yep.
Whereas now we're seeing these AI and BI platforms come together where you can just ask it to create a chart, or ask it to output you a CSV, or whatever you need, you can start to use there. Some other things are like, data quality and data lineage. Those are big topics. Again, this is all just like low barrier to entry. If you set your data up in the right way, you automatically get these things powered through your data platform. You don't really need to go and set them up. Now, maybe you want to do some more and customize it, etc. That's fine, but you have all these things out of the box just because you chose a data platform and set up your data the correct way. And it doesn't really replace yet, I would say it doesn't really replace like if you want to run specific machine learning workloads on a data set to output like specific results that you're looking for, right? That's not what this is aiming to do quite yet, I think, in 2025. But I think the big thing we'll see is, these platforms trying to integrate business users into their platform to become less of just a data engineering platform into a organization data platform.
Yeah, and I think that's a big deal, and that's a big point. I mean, you're really talking about the blurring of roles or partitions within the data analytics lifecycle that typically represent, right? Data platforms are for backend engineers, for data architects, where they're facilitating the build. Then they turn it over to a team that's facilitating the report build or going in for insights. You're talking about basically kind of placing that into one single kind of blurry work stream where it kind of existed in neat little buckets before. So it'll be interesting for sure to see that evolution over the course of this year for sure. I'm kind of curious because I want to jump back to you, Josh, really quick. I'm just curious. We're just talking about explainable AI, where you see that relating to platform native AI insights. And do you see vendors? I know Michael mentioned Databricks, he mentioned Snowflake. Do you see them incorporating explainable AI as part of their platform native AI capabilities?
So first up, great question. And first off, Michael did such a good job. Like a trend that we see with AI specifically is because it's new and because it sometimes is hard to understand. Like we see a lot of different things happening in the market to create a low barrier of entry, right? So like chatbots is a good example where it's easy to hop in and ask a question and get an answer, right? Same thing when we talk about integrating AI into your native data platform, right? It's something that's easily accessible, and you really just have to do quick, easy interactions with it with text, and then you get output, right? So we see a lot of that, and it's a great way of getting organizations to see like the quick, immediate, and kind of honestly easy impact that AI can have in your organization. Now, going back to your question about explainable AI, and how that might relate to being native on some of these platforms, the short answer is yes, we see that happening, right?
Yeah.
So it's really going to be a natural, I'll say like a natural evolution, as the demand for AI transparency and trust continues to grow. This is similar even, Kevin, you mentioned earlier about agentic AI, right? Like, so that's something that would be
Yeah.
more independent and autonomous, where you just essentially give it a goal and it runs with that goal instead of requiring so much input like generative AI. Same situation, right? As AI produces things and produces outcomes, we want to be able to understand how it got to that point.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is we're already seeing steps towards having explainable AI on their platforms, right? So let's think about Databricks, to your point with talking about vendors, right? So Databricks is a really good example. They've been integrating MLflow and other tools to facilitate machine learning operations and other model deployment. There are open source explainable AI libraries and frameworks in the ecosystem today, like Shapley. It's the Shapley additive explanations, and Databricks already supports this library. So we're already kind of seeing the beginnings of what it would look like today, and it's only going to go further. And it's very exciting.
I appreciate the conversation here, guys. I think this topic in particular is obviously going to have staying power over the course of this year. The reality is that data platforms are really heavily investing in baking in AI capabilities within their platforms. I think you're going to see that across data platforms as well as consumer platforms over the course of this year. I do view this definitely as a vehicle for adoption of AI solutions. I was candidly pretty mixed over the course of 2024. Folks are going to be a lot more inclined to use AI solutions if the barrier to entry is significantly lowered. And correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but I feel platform native capabilities are going to lower and reduce that friction. Because if you're already building the proper lakehouse and catalog structures within a platform like Databricks, you're set up to leverage the AI capabilities within the platform itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, at the end of the day, we're going to start seeing this shift like we talked about, where business users can go in and everything's just set up and ready. And it kind of almost reminds me of like what Salesforce became at one point with their CRM, having dashboarding tools, reporting, CRM capabilities all in one. I think we're going to start seeing something similar with these data platforms.
Yeah. All right, Michael, final question for you. Is Aaron Rodgers coming back to the Jets next season?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I think that's the toughest question out here. Probably not, but we'll see. We'll see.
All right, we'll see. So that's all the content that we have for today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I really love the participation from everybody who's out there listening to us right now. I wanted to thank each of our panelists for their time, their ideas, the concepts that they brought today. We'll be sending out the recording of this panel later today. Remember to connect with all of us on LinkedIn. We are real people. We'll be happy to answer any further questions that you have. Definitely sign up for our Analytics 8 newsletter. There's a lot of valuable content that you'll find in there. And just feel free to reach out with any questions. So thank you. I hope you had a great day, guys. Thank you for your time. And everybody have a good rest of your day and have a great weekend.
Thank you, guys. See y'all.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye.